So today we're going to be talking about coastal erosion, and this is lesson 1. This is just a bit of introduction to this concept. So firstly, what is coastal erosion? Like, where does it take place? Like, what field is this part of? This is part of geography, and so this is part of geography, and it's about coastlines. So so if you don't know, coastlines are where the land meets the sea. So for example, like the beaches you go to are coastlines. The cliffs that like people in the movies like stand on are coastlines. Like the ocean's right underneath those, right? Like a graph here. This is the ocean, and then this is like the beach thingy. This is the beach thingy. So this like beach part here around like this part is like the coastline, because that's where the land meets the sea. Like it's like, yeah, like this part over here or something. Like this entire beach is like, I guess you could call it the coastline. So that's that. So coastal erosion is about how the coastlines erode around the world, like different coastlines around the world. So what's erosion then? Well, erosion is basically wearing away, like something wearing away. So what this means is, like, for example, there's this piece of rock on the coastline. Like, let me draw like a rock. I don't know, I'll just draw a red rock. I can't find the other colors. I'll just draw a red rock. Now the waves will wash up this shore, like, for sure, and this rock might like disappear into this ocean, into the sea, if there is like a storm or something and this rock gets into the ocean, or if it's big enough to stay on the coastline consistently, the water will still slowly like wear away bits of the rock, and like this rock will become like smaller and smaller until it's like kind of gone or something. But then this process is not really obvious to us because it takes up like tens to thousands of years for a stage of erosion to like occur. So this is so like many coastlines right now are still in the process of eroding. So and other than erosion, there's also 2 other types of like ways that coastlines are shaped. So one is transportation, which is basically like when the material enters this sea over here, it moves, right? So it moves, like it can move to another coastline, or it can just like dissolve in the sea and become part of the sea itself, or it can just like float like at the bottom of the sea doing nothing. And the third way of how coastlines are formed is called deposition, like where material is dropped off. Like erosion can be said as the start of this process. Like material from one beach wears away, it goes into the sea, bits and chunks of it are gone into the sea. And then transportation is the middle process. It moves around the world, like the current and everything. And then deposition is when it's dropped off at like this random beach, like it's washed up ashore at a clear day or something like that. Or like maybe a lot of rock gathers around one place and it forms a new coastline or something like that. So that's the 3 ways coastlines are formed, and we'll be focusing on erosion. So there's 4 types of erosion. The first type is abrasion. So abrasion is basically when the rocks are thrown into into the cliffs by the waves. So the coastline is like broken down by itself. Like the most common example would be the cliff example, right? So let me just draw this random cliff. You know what, I'll just use green, whatever's. Okay, so this random cliff is over here, and like that's that. And then there's like some parts of rock in this cliff, right? So this part is the ocean, this part is the sea. Now, through some erosion processes that I'll talk about later on, this water basically like wears away some bits of the rock. Like for example, like this bit of the rock might have just fell like fell in the sea. So now the sea has this bit of rock over here. Just imagine this was here, and now since the sea continues to wash onto the shore, this rock will also follow the current of the sea, and it will also wash onto this like coastline over here, right? It'll still wash on this coastline. So the rock is gonna move, like it's gonna move for the current, and it's gonna bang into other parts of this coastline. It's gonna bang here, or it might bang here, like on the wall, or even in a huge thunderstorm, it might even go like at the top or something. So what this means is that essentially some parts of the coast, like more parts of the coastline, like for example this cliff, will wear away, because like when this rock bangs onto the cliff, there's friction. So like when you bang two heavy rocks together, some small parts of the rock wear away, because this entire cliff is essentially like a huge rock sitting there, right? It's just really huge, so that we call it a different name, a cliff. So the smaller rock, this original part of the cliff, bangs onto the cliff face, and some parts of the cliff go back into the sea. And then there's more rock so that this process repeats. And essentially, and eventually the cliff just erodes away and it's gone. So that's abrasion, when rocks are thrown into the coastline, or mainly a cliff. Another thing I want to talk about is like over time, this cliff, even if it doesn't wear away that fast, it becomes smoother. Like for example, at first the cliff might be like really rough. Like the cliff might have been like this or something, like it's really sharp and really rough. But then over time, since the rocks keep banging into this part and sliding down, like it's like sandpaper, and the cliff gets sanded and it becomes smoother. So the next type of erosion is attrition. Okay, so attrition. So what attrition really is when the rocks in the sea collide with each other. So like we kind of can ignore the cliff right now, or the coastline, or the beach, or we'll learn about those concepts later, but right now just imagine in the sea there's like bits and pieces of rocks that have eroded away from like coastlines all across the world, right? And these rocks kind of follow the current, but sometimes the current changes really quickly, so these rocks can bang into each other, and these rocks basically wear each other away. Like when two small rocks bang into each other, they might form smaller rocks because they break each other down. Like you can imagine something like this happens. And then what we have is even smaller rocks. Like we end up with rocks so small like that, like you can barely see this. So that's attrition. There's also solution, which is basically rocks dissolving into seawater. It's the process of like parts of rocks dissolving into seawater. Because like seawater is not just plain water that we drink, right? It's like it has acid in it. It's made up of like salt and some other minerals. It's not just plain H2O. So there's some acidity to the seawater, which dissolves the rocks over time. Now, I'm saying over time because it doesn't just take one day for the big chunk of rock to dissolve. It takes maybe like decades, or I don't know. So essentially in the sea, these big chunks of rocks dissolve into smaller pieces, which dissolve into even smaller pieces, which dissolve into even smaller pieces, until you basically can't see, until you basically can't really see the rocks, and the rocks become part of the sea. Like, you can't really see the rocks anymore. It's like part of the sea. The sea just becomes like murkier or something. The last type, the fourth type of erosion, the coastal erosion, is hydraulic action. So hydraulic action is when air and water get trapped inside of the cliff faces in like rocks and cliff faces on the coastline. On the coastlines, and this basically causes the rocks to break apart, and essentially part of the like cliff will fall out because there's too much cracks that are caused by air and water trapped inside the cliff faces. Like, so imagine this cliff again, and let me just color this cliff in. There's also water over here, and inside the water there is air. So like there's like air inside water, right? It's H2O, so there's obviously air inside the water. There's like oxygen and hydrogen, and there's also some salt. So this water washes up the cliff, and when it washes up the cliff, some parts, so like if the water is strong enough, if the wave is strong enough, like for example during a thunderstorm, the wave energy is huge enough that the water starts forming cracks inside of the cliff face. So like this cliff has cracks in it now, and some water goes in, and also some air goes inside along with the water, like oxygen. Like there's also air pressure. We don't feel the pressure of the air because we live, like we're in it right now. We're under air pressure right now. We're used to it. We're used to it since the day we were born. We're used to it since the day humanity existed. So we're used to it. But air pressure can also be a really big harm to these cliffs, and also water. So these cracks get larger and larger because once there's a tiny crack, more water can fit in and the crack can get even larger, right? Until, like, for example, if these two cracks get large enough, like this, they're all filled with water, then this part of the cliff might fall off. Like, let me just draw this. This part of the cliff might just, like, fall off. And then it will either be, and then this is into the sea. So it'll have abrasion, attrition, and even solution. Those processes all happen after hydraulic action. So this rock now can like bump back into the cliff face and create even more cracks and cause even more rocks to fall out, which is abrasion. And then after more rocks have fallen out, these rocks can collide into each other, and this is attrition. And they can also dissolve into smaller particles, which you can barely see. So that's solution. So that's the 4 types of coastal erosion.